those of you standing at the back, I think there are some empty seats up the front if you want to become a guest of the regulators. And so, thank you all for coming. We had a similar event in Melbourne a couple weeks ago. Peter's here. We're hoping to do one in our city later on. It's great for us to be, as regulators, to be able to come and meet you guys in person, tell you what we're thinking, and then to get your feedback directly. I think, especially in the fintech innovation space, it's really valuable for us as regulators to be getting that information, that interaction with industry. And so we thank you to the groups that have helped to organise tonight. I think it was a very long waiting list, so thank you for your enthusiasm. So the format for tonight is the regulators, speakers will each give you an overview about some of the regulatory policy legal issues that we've been looking at and we're thinking about, or that have been recently being implemented, and then there'll be time for questions. And just to introduce ourselves, the MCs, my name is Rhonda. I'm in ASIC's Markets Group. I also head up an internal ASIC task force working group on cryptocurrencies and ICOs. So we certainly have been very focused on this area from a range of angles for quite a few months now, and following all the developments in the industry. And it's not just ICOs, it's also other innovations in financial products and other kind of offerings that come to market that are linked to cryptocurrency. So it's certainly a very vibrant area. But now I'll hand over to Jonathan Hatch, who many of you know from our Innovation Hub.
Thank you, Ron. I'll be much quicker. But most of what we're going through today, you will see from the slides from the presenters. We'll try and keep this quick, so I know we'll get questions at the end, which you'll find on through the time that we have. And we'll try and cover up all the major things we've got. We'll give you some general guidance there at a high level. Moving forward, of course, we'll work over approaches either by more loops or by the approaches you do today. I'll pass it to John.
All right, can I just check, can everyone hear me okay? Yeah, all good? Thanks very much. Well, good evening everyone, and thanks very much for coming along tonight. And I know that AUSTRAC and the ATO will agree it's a fantastic opportunity to have both technology developers and the broader fintech industry in the room tonight, as well as others from the sector. Before I start, I wanted to say thank you to our host, Tyro Fintech Hub, for providing the venue tonight. Very much appreciated. And I also want to thank Adriana Bellotti and Jason Williams from the Blockchain Professionals Meetup Group, and Kim Harass of the Sydney FinTech Startups Meetup Group for helping us get tonight's event together. So very much appreciated to those people. Now, really, I wanted to start tonight by highlighting that building trust is a key challenge that I think we all face in promoting fintech. And importantly, that includes building trust in the infrastructure, that is the technology for some of these fintech solutions, as well as trust in people who are offering that new technology. Now, as I'm sure you'd all appreciate, scams can be corrosive when it comes to building any form of trust. And so we all have a role to play collectively, I think, in making sure they don't happen. Tonight, I want to focus on how ASIC's engaging with ICOs and cryptocurrencies, including resources that we've developed to assist you on how best to engage with us, and a few things that we want everyone to be very mindful of regarding misleading or otherwise inappropriate activity. Now, I might just move on to the next slide if I can. Fantastic. First, as we have a few regulators in the room tonight, I'll spend a moment explaining where ASIC fits into the financial regulatory framework. So ASIC, as some of you might know, is Australia's corporate markets and financial services regulator. And our goal is really to contribute to Australia's economic reputation and well-being by ensuring that our financial markets are fair and efficient, and that the investors who invest in them are confident and informed. Now, we're determined, as I'm sure that you are, to see Australia's innovative fintech and regtech businesses flourish in the right regulatory environment, And that means maintaining an open mind when it comes to new technologies and early days business models. But, and this is a really very important part, we need to be focused on both protecting Australian consumers and facilitating innovation across the financial services industry. So it's not a choice, we need to do both. Now when it comes to cryptocurrencies and our engagement with ICOs, this position is no different. And frankly, we believe this aligns with what your interests are as well. That is to build a more mature sector that can sustain long-term public confidence. Now, if you're acting with someone else's money or selling something to someone, the fact of the matter is you're going to have some obligations placed upon you. And that includes when individuals seek to raise funds through issuing digital tokens or coins. These obligations will depend on the precise nature of what you're offering and the undertaking of what you're doing. But there's one basic rule that will always apply. Whatever the structure of what you're offering to consumers, there's a basic obligation not to mislead or deceive anyone through offers you make to the public or through marketing material. So let's just go to the next slide. I might go to one after already.
Can I just interrupt a second?
Yeah, sure.
Can somebody deal with this phone, who's ever using this on a tripod? It's making very weird noises.
It might be the keyboard.
Whose phone is this on a...
Just turn down the volume.
Okay.
I'd rather not touch the phone. Nobody gonna...
It's a light stick.
Thank you.
At least it's not the speaker who's making really weird noises. So far. We might go to the next slide as well, sorry. Fantastic. All right. So let me run through what ASIC's doing in the area of crypto and ICOs. Now, there's been a lot of talk about crypto and ICOs in recent times, so I'm sure you're all very keen to learn exactly what's being done at present by regulators. At ASIC, we've been dealing with keen interest from consumers, investors, entities, advisors, service providers and intermediaries. In fact, over the past year, we've engaged with more than 200 businesses or people on ICOs or crypto, either through our Innovation Hub or related business units. Still on the engagement front, we've been working with overseas regulators and also domestic regulators, sharing information as they clarify how crypto is regulated across laws as diverse as taxation, anti-money laundering, payment systems and financial services. Now, we've also worked closely with the ACCC very recently to obtain a delegation of power from them that basically allows ASIC to take action if there are allegations of conduct that contravenes Australian consumer laws, regardless of whether a financial product or service is involved. And I'm here tonight to give you one key message, and that is the key consumer law that we are really concerned about is the consumer law about not misleading or deceiving members of the public. And that's either in offer documents or marketing material. So that is a very keen area of focus that we will have going forward. Whatever the structure of your cryptocurrency or ICO offering, we will be looking at that point. I'll just move to the next slide if I can. Fantastic. Look, now obviously the topic of ICOs and crypto is a complex topic, and there are quite a few moving parts at the moment, so I did want to spend some time explaining the practical resources that are already available for those of you who are interested in working in this area. So last year we released a public document, an ASIC information sheet, which is information sheet 225, which provides guidance for entities that are considering an ICO. And it explains that the legal status of an ICO is dependent on the circumstances of that ICO, such as how it's structured and operated, as well as the rights that attach to the token. Now, regardless of the structure, however, as I said before, there's one law that will always apply, and that is you can't make misleading or deceptive statements about the product. I'll just move to the next slide if I could. Okay, so the information sheet, to go into further detail, explains that where a token is offered through an ICO, is a financial product, there may be additional laws that apply. That is, in addition to that misleading or deceptive prohibition that I mentioned before. For example, an ICO could be a managed investment scheme. So if you're pooling investor funds and then you're using that to invest in digital coins, or if investor money is being managed collectively, that might be something called a managed investment scheme. So a collective investment scheme, with particular rules that attach to that. An ICO could be an offer of shares, where the rights attaching to the token are similar to the rights attached to a share, such as they give you rights of ownership of a body, voting rights and rights to participate in profit. An ICO could be a derivative, where the token is a price based on factors such as an underlying market or asset price, and price movements result in a payment obligation. Or it could be something called a non-cash payment facility, where the token is an arrangement for payments that can be made to a number of payees. And it's also important to note that if a token is a financial product, platforms that offer to buy and sell the token might be something called the financial market, and there are also regulatory rules that attach to that. So what I did want to announce tonight is that we will be looking to update our information sheet 225, in light of some of the common queries that we've had through our Innovation Hub, and that will be happening within coming weeks. It's not too far away at all. We'll include some questions that we think should be explained to all potential investors, consumers or users. And these are questions that are really intended to help people make sound business decisions about their cryptocurrency businesses, or about whether to invest in a particular cryptocurrency or ICO product. We'll also highlight that Australian corporate and consumer laws might apply. They're the ones that I've mentioned before around misleading or deceptive conduct, even if an ICO is created and offered overseas. And that's obviously an important point given the international nature of many of these products. Okay, I might just move to the next slide. Okay, so some things to consider. The development of innovative technologies like blockchain and ICOs clearly have the potential to change how our society engages with financial products and services, and that is a very positive outcome. But with any change comes risk, and I wanted to take some time now to talk about a few concerns that we have that I think need to be addressed by regulators and people working in the area collectively. Firstly, I think there's a certain level of opportunism, including businesses or people looking to undertake an ICO because it's seen as an easy, low regulation and low cost option. And the concern there, I suppose, is that really immature businesses go to market and get investor funds before they're ready. Now, I think there exists a perception that Australian regulations don't apply or can be avoided if ICOs are offered from overseas jurisdictions. And I can't stress enough what I said before. If you're making offers to Australians and you're doing business here in Australia, for example, issuing securities or tokens to Australian consumers, the laws here can apply, and people do need to realise that. And I think with ICOs, of course, there are also risks relating to poor governance or business practices around the sale of tokens, or even the manipulation of prices around the sale of tokens. And I think those concerns are well documented. And I think there are also real risks around making sure the right level of information is given to consumers before they decide to invest. And finally, while it's not directly related to ASIC and what we regulate, I know there are also some issues around anti-money laundering and know your client considerations, and I'm sure that's something that we'll hear more from our colleague at AUSTRAC here tonight. Now, I'm here tonight simply to say that these concerns can undermine integrity of token-based products and services, and ultimately can impact on the attractiveness of this sector and affect its credibility within the broader financial system. In other words, I think it's in everybody's interest to try and deal with these problems. Okay, let me talk now quickly about engaging with ASIC, the best way to approach this if you have any questions. First of all, I've mentioned our updated information sheet 225, which will be issued in the coming weeks. If you have an interest in this area and you have questions, I urge all of you to read that updated information sheet first, which will cover ICOs and crypto as a starting point. And after that, get in contact with us through any existing contacts you have at ASIC or through our Innovation Hub. And the details of our Innovation Hub are just up there on the slide. It's important for you to do some of your own homework before you come and see us. So have a read of our guidance materials and try and work out how they might apply to you. But other things that are really important to us before we can try and help you is that you truly understand what your business model is going to be. What's the nature of the cryptocurrency or ICO you're looking at issuing? What's the nature of the information you're looking to provide to investors? Now, unless you have a good idea about these things, we're going to find it pretty difficult to help you because you're sort of operating off a blank sheet of paper. Now, we can't provide you with formal legal advice, but what we can provide you with is senior staff that you can ask questions of just to get a bit of a feeling of what our regulatory approach is going to be to particular issues. And I might just go to the next slide. Okay, all right. I've left the slide out, obviously. I should obviously end things tonight after that by reiterating that ASIC wants to continue to be proactive and forward-looking when it comes to innovation and innovative business models. But if there's one thing that I really need all of you to take away tonight, it's we're dealing with real people's money here, and our support for innovation can't come at the expense of basic consumer protections. And importantly for us, as I mentioned a couple of times, that will include making sure that consumers are not misled or deceived by information about the ICO or the crypto product. We really need to make sure that investors and their money are not unfairly harmed. So on that note, I'll wrap things up. I'm really looking forward to the questions later tonight, and it's my great pleasure now to introduce my colleague from AUSTRAC.
Thanks, John. So why is AUSTRAC here? Well, from the 3rd of April, all Australian businesses that offered digital currency exchange services are captured by new laws. New laws for anti-money laundering and counter-terrorist financing. So tonight I'm going to spend a couple of minutes talking about what those laws are and then go through what the obligations are for those businesses that are providing digital currency exchange services. There's still 4 or 5 seats down front if anyone at the back wants to come down. So Jonathan will click through. So firstly, a little bit about how we see our context, what we see as our operating environment. And AUSTRAC performs really 2 key roles. The first one is what we call a financial intelligence agency. So we collect or receive reports from our reporting population, and with that information we analyse it and then disseminate that to various domestic and overseas partners, including the agency sitting behind me. The second function we do is a regulator, which is where I sit in the organisation. So we monitor and enforce AML, anti-money laundering and CTF obligations. So for those in the audience that are providing a digital currency exchange service, you'll be in that middle blue circle. If anyone in the room thinks they sit in that first circle on the far left, people committing crime, perhaps after the event we could catch up and understand business currency. Okay, so just a little bit for those who, I suppose, prefer the graphics of how the new regulation works. So this comes under what we call our Anti-Money Laundering and Counter-Terrorist Financing Act, or which is called the AML Act. So you can see, for those of you who are moving around inside the crypto environment, you're not captured by our legislation. Okay, so it's only for those who are moving between the real or fiat currency to the cryptocurrency or back again are captured by that legislation. For those of you who prefer the written word rather than the pictures, this is just a straight extract from the AML Act, and I want to call out 2 phrases. So, exchanging digital currency for money, or exchanging money for digital currency. Okay, so that's the trigger. So if you don't do that, you're not captured by our legislation. Okay, so in case you are captured by that legislation, I just want to talk through a couple of key dates around the transition to our regime. So we've really set it up at the moment to transition those businesses that are already operating, so existing businesses. And we're allowing them to continue providing the service while the registration application is considered by AUSTRAC. And we have a 6th, 1 to 14th of May. Existing businesses can continue to do so and register with us. We've also had what's called a policy principle period for 6 months. Okay, and what that means is AUSTRAC can only take enforcement action against a digital currency exchange if the business fails to take reasonable steps to comply. Okay, and that's issued by the relevant Minister Angus Taylor, and that those steps that we would look at would include things: do you have any measures or any controls in place whatsoever? So you've started to develop a program. Do you have a transition plan? So have you documented how and when you'll reach compliance? What are the resources been committed to it? And quite importantly, what's the reporting to and understanding by the board of these obligations? So if you haven't commenced providing this service prior to the 3rd of April, you'll obviously need to go down a quicker route to achieve compliance. One of the things we talk about is, or one of the obligations for all our reporting entities is to conduct a risk assessment. It's really one of the first steps, is to understand what are the money laundering, terrorist financing risks that your business will face. And we look at through a couple of lenses. Firstly, what are the actual services that you are providing? What are the channels or customer interaction? So how do you communicate and interact with your customers? What is that channel? What's the customer profile? So who are your customers? Where do they reside? And then lastly, when has the risk changed? So what are the mechanisms of your organisation to identify and respond to changes in the risk profile? And I'll talk a little bit later about how we're helping industry through that risk assessment process, recognising, assessing organisations' likelihood of money laundering or terrorist financing occurring will be new to a number of people. So if you are captured by our legislation, and I've spoken at the start what they are, I just want to call out a couple of key requirements. So you must, like all our reporting entities, enrol with us. We have, just to give you some context, there's about 14,000 entities in Australia that enrol with AUSTRAC at the moment. Additionally, if you're providing digital currency exchange and also other remittance services, you're required to register with us. If you fail to register and continue the service your service, that becomes a criminal offence. As I mentioned before, you're required to conduct a risk assessment before the service is started. You must have a program, which is really about what are your means to identify, manage, and mitigate those risks. And lastly, there's some reporting obligations, which I'll talk about shortly. I would just, I suppose, make one point that this legislation or these laws has generally been welcomed by the digital currency exchange sector, and that's really for 2 reasons. One, it helps protect those businesses from being the target of criminals who may wish to launder funds or finance terrorism through the business. And secondly, I think the regulation also strengthens the public consumer, I suppose, confidence in the sector as well. So we have been received quite a lot of positive feedback from the sector around that. So just quickly talk about what are those obligations you might or you will have. So the first one is around suspicious matter reporting. So if a reporting entity forms suspicion at any time while dealing with a customer, and that can be from an inquiry by the customer to providing the service to afterwards, so it's quite broad, on a matter that might relate to an offence, and that can be quite broad, so it can be tax evasion, process of crime, terrorist financing, money laundering, or any other crime against the Commonwealth or state. There's a requirement to report to AUSTRAC. There's also what's called a threshold transaction. So those who are a little bit older in the audience will remember the idea of reporting a $10,000 transaction. So that still applies. So if you're providing a designated service that involves a transfer of currency of $10,000, the reporting entity must submit a report. Our obligations to report international funds transfers doesn't apply. I don't think that service would be provided by the sector. And then lastly, on an annual basis, all of our reporting entities have to submit what's called a compliance report. So it's really like a self-assessment of how you've managed your obligations over the preceding 12 months. So they're your main obligations. In terms of some of the things we've worked with over the industry, so over the last 18 months we've worked quite closely with the lead industry body. We've also had a designated web page on our website giving a lot of industry guidance. We've run a number of, run 5 workshops in 3 cities. We've had 34 businesses attend and 57 employees, just to give you a sense of the size of the sector. Coming up, we're hosting a webinar, so you'll get to hear from me again. And importantly, we're going to invite all the industry participants to come back in July and to share their experiences. And the things we're going to talk about is, firstly, what were some of the risks you identified in your risk assessment process? And we're going to share that with the sector. What were some of the triggers you used to generate alerts? So having identified what your risk might be, what are the alerts you set up to try and find those across your customer base? And then lastly, we're going to anonymise and socialise some of the suspicious matter reports that were reported to us, so to give you a sense of what your peers are identifying and reporting. And again, we'd expect you to feed that back into your risk assessment process to see if they apply for you. Lastly, we have seen a couple of individual reporting entities have used, that have been endorsed, approved or licensed by AUSTRAC. So the registration by AUSTRAC of a digital currency exchange does not constitute endorsement of that business nor compliance with the obligations. And similarly, if you're previously registered as a remitter provider but not registered as a digital currency provider, then we wouldn't expect you to say, we don't want you to say that you are registered or imply or infer as a digital currency exchange. So I just pick up John Rice's point is around just tell the truth around this. So don't imply or infer something that's not the case. So I'll hold there to give some time at the end, but I'd like to introduce my 2 colleagues from the ATO. And you'll hang on, sorry.
Hi everyone, so it's time for everyone's favourite topic of conversation, tax. Lorraine and I are really happy to be here tonight to talk about these interesting issues, tax issues. A significant part of our role at the ATO is to make the tax law as simple as possible for the community to understand and to make it as easy as possible for people to comply with their tax obligations. So tonight's a big part of that. So part of this is really about ensuring we have easy to understand guidance products that clearly explain the Commissioner's view of how the tax law applies in various circumstances. Now we recognise that this is an emerging area, a rapidly evolving area, and we need to ensure we provide appropriate guidance as it evolves. The ATO has had a public view of the tax treatment of Bitcoin for a while now though, since 2014. Bitcoin is a CGT asset and it is not money or currency. So these are important views by the Commissioner. This view applies to other cryptocurrencies with similar characteristics to Bitcoin. And it means that cryptocurrency transactions are taxable. The specific tax treatment of cryptocurrency transactions will depend on the particular facts and circumstances of the taxpayer involved though. So our plan tonight is to explain the tax treatment of cryptocurrencies, including canvassing issues in relation to income tax, capital gains tax, GST, FBT, pay-as-you-go withholding, and some self-managed super fund issues. So that's a lot of tax topics. And then we'll touch on some of the key tax issues to take into account in relation to ICOs. So noting from the outset though that there's no simple answer for when it comes to ICOs. It will very much depend on the particular facts and circumstances of the particular arrangement and the particular taxpayer involved to determine the tax consequences of an ICO. So I'll hand over now to Lorraine and she'll start talking about the tax treatment of cryptocurrencies. Okay. Slide, please. So in the next 5 to 10 minutes I'm going to take you on a bit of a whirlwind tour through tax. As Andrew mentioned, there's a lot of tax implications across the various tax laws. So we're really just looking at a high-level overview. So hold on to your seats and here we go. Income tax. If you are carrying on a business or you are transacting cryptocurrency as part of a commercial transaction with a profit-making intention, your gains and losses in transacting cryptocurrency will be ordinary income and deductible losses. Now, there's two concepts in there, carrying on a business and commercial transactions with a profit-making intention. The ATO has issued public guidance on both of those areas, and the general principles in those guidance products will apply to cryptocurrency equally to any other business. For those of you who are interested in tax rulings, carrying on a business, the relevant factors are in tax ruling 97/11. And for commercial transactions with a profit-making intention, you'll need to look at the factors in TR 92/3. We also do have general guidance available on our website, which talks in a little bit more mainstream language what those factors are and how they're applied. If you receive Bitcoin for goods or services you provide as part of your business, you'll need to record the market value of the cryptocurrency in Australian dollars as part of your ordinary income. So it's basically treated like a barter transaction. The value in Australian dollars will be the fair market value, which can generally be obtained from a reputable online exchange, for example. Now, if you don't fall into one of those two categories, then the normal CGT rules will apply. As Andrew mentioned, we consider Bitcoin, for example, to be a CGT asset. Each type of cryptocurrency will be considered to be a separate CGT asset. And that has the consequence that when you exchange one cryptocurrency for another type of cryptocurrency, you'll have a CGT event. And so you'll need to work out whether or not you've made a gain or loss on that event. Thank you. In the CGT space, there's an exemption called the personal use asset exemption. It is one area where there seems to have been some misunderstandings in the community about how that applies. We've recently updated our web guidance just a few weeks ago to try and help clarify how this personal use asset exemption works. Now, whether or not a cryptocurrency is a personal use asset will depend on the particular facts and circumstances of each case. Which is something that seems to be a common theme across the regulators. It involves considering the purpose for which the cryptocurrency was acquired and kept, as well as what the cryptocurrency is ultimately used for. Now, cryptocurrency that was acquired and is kept or used mainly to make purchases of personal items, items of personal use and consumption, will generally be a personal use asset. However, cryptocurrency won't be a personal use asset if it's acquired, kept or used as an investment, as part of a profit-making scheme, or in carrying on a business. So for example, if you're acquiring cryptocurrency for the purpose of speculating on an increase in value, and then you dispose of it when the value does increase, the cryptocurrency won't be a personal use asset regardless of what you use the cryptocurrency for. In relation to the exemption, capital gains are only disregarded capital gains in relation to cryptocurrency that's a personal use asset are only disregarded if the cost you incurred to acquire the cryptocurrency is less than $10,000. However, all capital losses that you make on cryptocurrency that are personal use assets are disregarded regardless of the cost incurred to acquire the cryptocurrency. Record keeping, the normal rules apply. There's probably not too much interesting in this slide. Basically, you need to keep records, as with any other transactions you're undertaking. The kinds of records we need, or that you need to keep,
include the date of the transaction, the value of the cryptocurrency in Australian dollars at the time of the transaction, what the transaction was for and who the valid party was, even if all you have is the wallet address. So moving on to GST. Before 1 July 2017, a transfer of Bitcoin was a supply for GST purposes. What that essentially meant is that for consumers there was the potential for double GST liability. First, when they would pay GST when they acquired the cryptocurrency, and then they would also incur GST or pay GST if they were using that cryptocurrency then to pay for goods or services that attracted GST. Obviously that's not a desirable outcome, so the government enacted some amendments, and so from 1 July 2017 the law was amended to align the GST treatment of a new term called digital currency with money. The effect of those amendments is that suppliers and acquisitions of digital currency are no longer subject to GST. It's important to note that the digital currency is not money. It doesn't deem cryptocurrency or digital currency to be money, and it doesn't have any impact for income tax purposes. It is a separate category and just treats it like it's money. So it has the same GST outcome. Where digital currency is received as payment for taxable goods and services, then it's treated in the normal way and GST must be remitted in Australian dollars. Moving on to pay-as-you-go and fringe benefits tax. Cryptocurrency is property, not money, and so it falls within the definition of a non-cash benefit for pay-as-you-go withholding rules. It's a property fringe benefit. And that means that the payment of cryptocurrency, being a fringe benefit, means the employer is subject to the provisions of the Fringe Benefits Tax Assessment Act. Employees who pay their employees cryptocurrency in lieu of their salary and wages under an effective salary sacrifice arrangement are subject to FBT rather than pay-as-you-go withholding. And the fringe benefits then become non-assessable, non-exempt income in the hands of the employee. Now, where the employee requests that salary and wages that they've already derived be paid in cryptocurrency instead of Australian dollars, that's not regarded as an effective salary sacrifice arrangement, and the normal pay-as-you-go withholding rules will apply in those circumstances. Finally, self-managed super funds. There's been a lot of media attention recently around SMSFs seeking to invest in cryptocurrency. So we recently published guidance, and we've got the code up there. If you see on a number of slides tonight, we've got in brackets QC and some numbers. That's called a quick code. If you input those numbers straight into our search function on the ATO website, it'll bring up that page at the top of the list. So you don't have to remember, if you're looking for our guidance, you don't have to remember the full name, you can just write down that number and search using that number. So we published a new page last month on SMSF investing in cryptocurrencies. And while SMSFs are not prohibited from investing in cryptocurrencies, the investment must be allowed for under the trust deed, and it must be in accordance with the fund's investment strategy, and the fund must comply with the CISA regulatory requirements regarding investment restrictions. So the normal regulatory requirements that apply in relation to other investments also apply to investments in cryptocurrency. We strongly encourage small self-managed super funds to seek independent professional advice before undertaking any new investment, and the same will apply to investment in cryptocurrencies. Finally, we've recently been undertaking some public consultation in relation to two particular areas. One is about practical issues with exchanging one cryptocurrency for another cryptocurrency, and the second was in relation to record-keeping rules as they apply to cryptocurrency transactions. We undertook this public consultation through our Let's Talk platform with links from our website. We've had really fantastic engagement. Unfortunately, the consultation period officially closed last Friday, so you're too late now. But we have had a great engagement. We've had nearly 800 responses to that consultation over the last month. So that's a lot for us to now look at, review. We're in the process of obviously collating all of that feedback, reviewing it and seeing how we can make things simpler and easier for people to comply, whether that be further public advice and guidance or whatever product we need to, or however we can help taxpayers comply with their obligations. So watch this space on that. I'll now hand back to Andrea to talk about initial point agreements.
Okay, so just like any other transaction or event, the normal tax rules apply to ICO arrangements. So for example, the rules for determining whether someone has derived ordinary income or incurred deductible expenses. As previously noted, we cannot provide a one-size-fits-all answer to say this is the tax effect of an ICO. There are various different ways in which an ICO may be undertaken, different rights and obligations involved, and different purposes and outcomes sought to be achieved. And this will have different effects for tax purposes. So the tax consequences of an ICO will very much depend on the particular facts and circumstances of the particular arrangement and the particular taxpayer involved. We encourage people to come to us to discuss their particular circumstances because we have an early engagement process and a private binding ruling process that can assist taxpayers to get the certainty in relation to how the tax law applies to their particular circumstances. So our experience to date from discussions with advisors and taxpayers that have been involved in issuing ICOs is that many of the questions being raised are ones that are not particularly unique to ICOs, and we have existing public guidance on these issues. So for example, there are all those sorts of issues that are listed on the slide are some of the things that have been raised. So when will I be carrying on a business or undertaking a commercial transaction with a profit-making intention, which Lorraine discussed previously. So there are a number of factors to consider based on the relevant case law in this area. There's a plethora of case law and our tax rulings go through those factors. It's also important to be mindful of the different legal forms in which you can undertake your business, as there are different outcomes for tax purposes and obligations depending on whether you're a sole trader, company, partnership, or have created a trust relationship. We have existing guidance on when you need to have an ABN and register for GST, for instance, and if you have people working for you, and you will need to understand the difference between an employee and a contractor and the different obligations you'll have as a result. So for example, if you have employees, you'll have pay-as-you-go withholding obligations and superannuation obligations. And it's quite straightforward when you're an Australian resident carrying on business in Australia. But if you're undertaking activities overseas, you'll need to consider your tax residence and the source of your income from your activities. There could also be tax treaty implications of your activities, and including whether you have a permanent establishment in Australia or offshore. You may also need to consider the intellectual property issues if you are using or developing IP as part of your activities, and consider where the IP was developed and by whom, and whether you are characterising any income or expenses from such IP appropriately for tax purposes. So our current thinking is that it might be useful for us to pull all these issues together in one spot on our website, so that if you're an ICO issuer, you can go to that one spot to see all the relevant links to the various parts of our guidance covering those issues. So in terms of the more specific tax issues to consider if you're an ICO issuer, there are a number of things to think about from a tax perspective. So what is it that is being offered under your ICO? What do the tokens do? And will that change over time? What other products or services are being offered, and will that change over time? What are the legal rights, if any, that are being offered under the ICO, and what obligations do investors have? All of these considerations are relevant to determining the character of the funds in the ICO issuer's hands that they receive under the arrangement. So, for example, whether the funds are ordinary income from the provision of products or services. And so likewise, similar considerations are relevant for investors in ICOs. An investor will need to think about what they are being offered under the ICO, so what legal rights or obligations do they have under the arrangement, what characteristics do the tokens they are being issued have, is it a new cryptocurrency being issued, is it a CGT asset? So does it have the characteristics that are required in order to be considered property? So does it have characteristics similar to Bitcoin? And then what is the character of any returns they receive from the ICO? So for example, is it ordinary income, capital gains, dividends, or interest income? So we've covered quite a few tax issues to consider in relation to cryptocurrencies and ICOs tonight. And we thought it best to finish off with this slide, which reiterates there's a lot of useful guidance that the ATO already has on these issues, and we've got our landing page there, the tax treatment of cryptocurrencies, which is a really good starting point to get across some of these numerous tax issues that we've discussed. And from that landing page, it also contains a lot of things to the relevant tax rulings and tax determinations. We also have an ATO community, which is an online forum which has its own cryptocurrency board, where the community can discuss tax issues, share information and ask questions. And the ATO participates in that community, and it provides answers to questions raised. And you might have noticed that the level of interest in cryptocurrencies has really spiked this year, and so has the level of comments on that community board. So we're working really hard to provide answers to all of those questions as well. And then lastly, just wanting to encourage you to consider the information we have on our website in relation to our early engagement process and our private binding ruling process, as these are very helpful and useful if you think you need to get specific advice from the ATO in relation to your particular circumstances. So these processes can really help you engage early, and the ATO can help you understand the various tax issues that may be relevant to you and help you to ask the right questions so that you can get certainty as to how the Commissioner will consider that the tax law applies to your specific circumstances. So I just want to say thanks again. Lorraine and I are very happy to be here tonight, and we'll take questions as well. Thanks.
What I'll get you guys to do is keep that mic, and I'll walk around with this one to take all these questions. For everyone else here, as Rhonda mentioned, I'm quite accustomed to taking questions normally. Yes, no. Ready? Do we have this? Yes, we do. All right. As I was saying, I work in Innovation Hub, quite accustomed to taking questions. Today we have a few senior regulators from different areas here. I'll then move around and ask if anyone does have specific questions. We'll take them and we'll try and get some from them today. Let's start with you first.
Thanks. Quick question for John Price from ASIC. ASIC already has powers of regulate misleading deceptive conduct. You've indicated you're seeking a delegation from the ACCC. Is that in the event of however it's determined that an ICO is not a financial product?
Correct. That's correct. That's absolutely correct. So, depending on the structure of the ICO, it may well be a financial product. It could be an interest in a collective investment scheme, could be a derivative, could be a security, could be a non-cash payment facility. Equally, it might not be any sort of financial product. Even if it's not a financial product, then the ACCC had the power to regulate that and make sure there were no misleading or deceptive statements that were made in relation to the product. We approached the ACCC and said, look, we're happy to cover the field in this area if you're happy to delegate the power to us, and they have done so.
Hi, Philip Cuff from Token One. We're a cybersecurity company in Sydney. I attended a really interesting, similar but really interesting forum in Singapore recently at Money 2020, where regulators from Singapore, UK and one other jurisdiction were talking about an international sandbox for looking at regulation, not just from an individual country, but state of right tonight. I was just wondering whether the panel has any views on that, whether there have been discussions of that type, because that would be great if I'd really encourage that. It's fantastic.
So I'm happy to kick off with that. So as part of the work of our innovation hub, one of the key things we do is engage with international regulators. So there are a whole collection of regulators we speak to on a very regular basis: Singapore, UK, Europe more generally, the US, the list goes on. With many of those regulators we have arrangements where we effectively provide introductions between each other of fintechs that we've dealt with previously. We are in discussions with the UK in particular about even enhancing the existing arrangements that are in place. So discussions are underway. We're taking that as far as we can within the existing framework, and we have to be able to make some further announcements about that in due course.
From an AUSTRAC perspective, so we're slightly different. So we don't issue licenses for someone to conduct services. So I suppose the efficacy of the sandbox doesn't hold as much from an AUSTRAC perspective. So we have very close relationships with the UK FCA, which is both a conduct regulator and also the ATO regulator. We have an individual subcontractor there. So we're called out to them that we're happy to participate as much as we can in that global sandbox concept. Bear in mind, if you want to operate in Australia from an AML perspective, you just have a program that is commensurate to your risk that you face. So if you're low risk, low money laundering risk, low terrorist financing risk, then the program would reflect that, which would be less onerous. Okay, but it's not a license or a no license situation.
Hi, good evening. I'm Daniel from Double A Capital. Some of our investing companies have been considering ICOs as a way of capital raising, and in their analysis with their legal teams, it always came up that Australia, when they did an ICO, there was potentially that they had to charge GST on the tokens that they sold as part of the ICO process. And I just wanted to confirm what we saw tonight. There was a comment that from the 1st of July 2017, the law's been amended to align the GST treatment of digital currency money. So are you saying that in an ICO process, there isn't a requirement anymore to charge GST on those tokens?
It really depends on the nature of the token. So whether that token meets the characteristics of a digital currency under the new legislation in the GST Act. So, for instance, one of the characteristics is if it takes its value from the provision of rights to other goods or services, then it won't be a digital currency. So that may be the context of the advice that you got. So GST would be payable in that context.
Okay, thank you.
Just a quick question. Some of these terms, I think we all feel comfortable with the existing technologies, cryptocurrency, ICO, some of these things we have examples for, but I haven't seen a definition of any of these things tonight. I'm just wondering if you believe that I'm a technologist, so any definition, of course, can only hold so far, and new technology could come and blur any boundary. I'm just wondering what definitions you're working with using this, all these regulations.
I anticipate that. So our definition for digital currency, and just a summary from our act, is a digital representation of value. It's the first definition. But we also have the ability under our rules to determine, to declare something to be digital currency, having regard to what means to be exchanged or digital process or crediting is declared to be digital currency. So I'd refer you back to the Act, but the core one is the digital representation of value.
And from the point of view of ASIC, I mean, really, to a large extent, things are regulated in accordance with the substance of what they do, not necessarily what they're called. So it's a collective investment scheme if you pool money and people expect a return from that pooling. It's a derivative if the value of what you're talking about varies in accordance with an underlying indice. It's a share if you get ownership rights and a right to participate in profit. So it's a more functional type of analysis most of the time.
the same from a tax office perspective. We don't have a concept of cryptocurrency defined in our legislation. We've got the digital currency concept, which I've referred to before, but there's no need to us to give you or to work off a definition of cryptocurrency per se. We're really looking at, for instance, is it an asset for CGT purposes and things like that. So I hope that answers your question.
Hello. I'm part of a international group based in the UK that has the right to trade gold in the UK. They're looking at doing an ICO. Now, where does ASIC's, I suppose, regulatory reach go to? For instance, if it's legal to do it in the UK and you're not targeting Australian customers, how does that ICO fit into your regulatory framework?
Yeah.
And as a separate but related issue, there's a similar one called Digits, which is based in Singapore, that issues a digital gold token. Are they now, or would they now be considered illegal under the terms of reference you've just outlined?
Yeah. So what you're talking about here is the real question of when our financial services or products provided in Australia, we have some guidance. It's publicly available on our website. If I were a younger person, I'd be able to recite the exact regulatory guide, but I can no longer remember what it is. I might get you the details after this, and I'll send you a link to that particular guidance. But really, the critical question as far as providing a financial service is you need to take steps so you're not targeting Australian investors. Otherwise, you do tend to run a little risk. The other question is whether you're carrying on a business here in Australia, and there's some various case law around that. Please come up later, and I'll endeavour to find that regulatory guide I'm thinking of, and we can send you a link.
Two questions. First one for John. John, the current company structures or corporate structures, EY, etc., are very much built around the old paradigm of bricks and mortar, etc. We've been looking at potentially a better structure to move to the cryptocurrency world, and we started to look at things like cooperatives or collectives. Are ASIC like to introduce an additional company organisational structure that might be better suited to the sort of cryptocurrency world?
So the short answer to that is ASIC doesn't actually create the regulation that it administers. So the various laws and regulations that we administer are created by Parliament. If I take the question a bit more broadly, am I aware of any move in the Parliament to have a standalone regime to regulate initial coin offerings? No, I'm not at this stage.
Possibly just a suggestion, maybe an idea to bring on something like that, you know, look into whether it's possible. I see a lot of people in the audience nodding their heads.
Yeah.
Probably also running into the same issues that we are. None of the existing company structures are really good.
Sure. The best advice I can give you is talk to your local member of Parliament, because without government legislating those laws, we can't just create them.
Second question for the tax office. A lot of us have gone into cryptocurrencies on an investigative basis. So we've looked at different style wallets, we've looked at where the systems are hardened, we've tried for transferring, all part of the learning process, not with the intention of making profits or trading. Would we be treating those sort of expenses as a training expense or as an R&D style expense? It's a very not intending to defend R&D benefits.
It's very much a factual issue that you're talking about there. It depends on the particular facts and circumstances, really what's going on in terms of intention. And and the intention can change over time as well. So you may started going into a venture with a particular intention, and then your intention changes. So really, it's very much a specific factual circumstance that we need to look at closely to work out what's exactly going on and what your intention was.
How often, how much, what evidence you've got to support what the intent was, how it fits with your business, all of those sort of think all of those factors are things that we would look at and ask you about in the context of operating expenses.
Again, maybe I'll finish off my hold of the mic there. It might be worth the ATO looking at some sort of almost investigatory style claim, obviously below certain limits, $10,000 or whatever, just to make tax life a lot easier. But it does have an advantage to really investigate and test.
Yeah, hello. I think there's a lot of problems or challenges arising for all of us in cryptocurrency or crypto ICOs. One of those are, look, do we go outside Australia? Do we take on another residency to promote our ICO? And obviously, at the end of the day, we want to be inside the law. We want to do the right thing. But we might find ourselves somehow not doing the right thing and getting in trouble. We don't want to do that. What we want to do is make a business work with you. And I think that's a real challenge that we're facing. I mean, would you...
I'd love to elaborate. We'd love to see your business work as well. From my perspective, as I said during my prepared remarks today, the key focus I've got is not whether you're regulating yourself as a managed investment scheme or a derivative, because I don't think most consumers would care about that. My key focus is whether you're telling porky pies and selling the token. And that's what we're going to be focused on.
So what you're saying is if we are honourable and doing the right thing and we're making business work, you're on that phase.
I'm saying our primary focus is going to be on whether the disclosure that you're providing to consumers, both from the point of view of offers and advertisements, is true and correct, and it's not misleading things by omission. And a secondary issue is the sort of legal structure. So for me, that's not the primary issue I'm looking at. The real issue I'm looking at is whether what you're saying is true and correct and doesn't omit material information.
And the other thing is, if you did have a company abroad, you live here, you are obviously using your bank account abroad to pay probably contractors, how would that be perceived by the Australian Tax Office?
That's a very good question.
So if you're running a business and you're living in Australia simply because you have part of that business offshore doesn't necessarily mean that you're not still an Australian resident for tax purposes. So that's one point I'd make for starters. But was there anything else particular?
So my point really is that, if we're living here, maybe some of our workers would be contractors here or contractors elsewhere to find the best contractors. Would be paying, say, for instance, in Singapore, tax there. Would we also be liable for paying tax here?
Yeah, potentially. If you're an Australian, it depends on your residency. So if you're running your business as an individual and you're living here all the time, you're residing here for tax purposes, so you're an Australian tax resident. And if you're a corporate, for instance, if you're carrying on business here or you're incorporated here, then you're a resident for tax purposes. So simply because you have part of your business or part of your contractors overseas, that doesn't affect necessarily the residency of you, depending on the nature of how you set yourself up.
And the bank should be able to see this.
Probably just one minor point I'd add to that too is if the company is set up overseas, you control the company, you're here as a resident, you also have control for company rules, which can result in attribution back of the income back to you here in Australia as well.
So could I get around that? So can I live, is it 6 months a year or 5 months a year?
Depends on consideration of a whole bunch of factors like
Peter Victoria from Employment Investors. I'd like to ask an intelligent tax question. I don't have it. So this is to John. Many financial planners and advisors are licensed to provide advice on superannuation, basic and deposit products, securities, derivatives, maybe some risk products. If a financial advisor with that sort of license starts giving advice to a superannuation client, can that advice actually include cryptocurrencies, ICOs, and even broader things such as collectibles or whatever? Only on.
Yeah. So that's a really good question. It's going to depend on a few things. First of all, the it's very important to understand what the authorisation of the financial advisor covers. So the reason why I mention that is not everybody gets the same licence, okay? So we actually pick and choose what things they can provide advice on. And so really it's going to come down to a question of, well, what sort of thing do we think this product is? So let's say it's an ICO. What sort of thing do we think the ICO is? Do we think it's a share? In which case you look at the financial advisor and see whether the financial advisor is able to advise on shares. Do we think that actually the ICO is not a financial product at all? In which case we can regulate statements if they're misleading or deceptive. But they don't need, people don't need a license from us if they're advising about products that aren't financial products. A good example is real estate. So real estate is not a financial product under our law. So if you advise about real estate, you don't need a financial advice license from us. So I know that's a bit of a complicated answer, but it's sort of the way that the regulatory system is set.
Even if you put it into superannuation, which is license,
yes.
just a separate category.
Yeah, so there's a separate issue with super. So with super, you need to meet some tax office requirements about the nature of the product. My colleagues from the ATO will be able to speak to that rather than
Colleagues from the ATO will be able to refer to the website. Sorry, we're not super people.
With super, you need to meet a series of tests basically in terms of what product you're supposed to be investing in, and you've also got trustee obligations, so it needs to be in the best interest of the members and so on.
Yeah, so some of those key regulatory requirements are around making sure that your the SMSF assets are separate from the members' assets, making sure there's clear ownership of assets by the SMSF trustee. I mentioned it has to be, any investments have to be consistent with the fund's investment strategy and allowed for under the trust deed. There's prohibitions about acquiring investments from third parties. There's requirements around valuation of the assets. That's all I can think of off the top of my head, but there's a whole range of regulatory requirements.
I've got a question about the utility tokens on ICOs. I just wanted to understand what's your take on the ICOs who have a utility use, and whether you've considered whether you've had any ICO in Australia that you treat as a utility, not as a security, and if not, what are the things that you would take into consideration for an ICO to be a utility? Because there are ICOs around the world which have a clear utility case. So I just wanted to understand what's your take on that.
So I think the tricky part in answering that question is I'm not sure there's consensus around or standard form around what you call an utility ICO or other ICO. As I say, from our point of view, how we regulate things depends very much on the individual terms of the particular initial coin offering and its legal structure. The best place or the best source of information I can recommend to you is that information sheet we've issued 255, and then you really need to look at the terms and conditions of the ICO and work out whether you fit within any of the categories there. So that'd be my key recommendations. If you still have queries after that, I'd recommend you come through our Innovation Hub website and we can try and help you further. But we will need to know a fair bit more detail around the exact nature and specific legal obligations that attach to the ICO.
So if the answer is not there, and if the coin has a utility case, would ASIC be prepared to consider it as a utility, in other words?
So it's not, for us, it's not a question of whether it's a utility or not. It's a question of whether or not its function and nature fits the various other tests that we're talking about. So is it in the nature of a security? Is it in the nature of a collective investment scheme? Is it in the nature of a derivative? Is it in the nature of a non-cash payment facility? We're not going to be able to answer that question unless we know precisely the legal terms and conditions that attach to an ICO.
Michael Bacchino from Piper Alderman. Just a quick question for the ATO. You mentioned, and a lot of questions come up, including coming into my practice, about personal use exemption for crypto and CGT. The common scenario is that someone will have purchased Bitcoin or Ethereum, say, back in the day when it was a lot cheaper, and then used it to transact perhaps in ICOs or token sales. Now, probably building on a question that was put earlier, many people have done this from a position of exploration and trying to learn how to use this new this new technology. Can you give any examples to the room of what kind of records ATO would look for when someone is trying to substantiate a personal use versus an investment use? Because you could appreciate someone playing around with crypto and transferring it around, including on an exchange or in ICOs, could look very much like they are trading. I mean, obviously, if they're buying the dip and selling the high, that's one thing. But if someone's simply buying into a token and assume that token they're buying is not a security, what would you look for if you went in and someone said, I bought this all below 10,000, it was all personal use?
There's a lot of issues that we look at there. I mean, for instance, one point I'd make initially is you might have a purpose when you got into those cryptocurrencies early was to be just to play around with it, to learn a bit more how the software works and things like that. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the purpose for which you continue to hold that over time might change in terms of working out, why you hold that cryptocurrency for the purpose of personal use exemption. So that's one point. So purpose can change over time. So simply because you acquired cryptocurrency for one reason won't dictate how you hold that as an asset for the whole period of time. Another point I would say is we would look at look at the nature of your transactions. If you were transacting a lot, what the environment was like, the reasons for that, you would need to sort of be able to explain the reasons for your various transactions, disposals, and getting into different types of cryptocurrencies. And also an obvious point would be if there's a length of time where you haven't done anything with that cryptocurrency, I mean that would go towards demonstrating that you're holding it as an investment as well.
But I would challenge you on that point, because a lot of people bought Bitcoin very early or Ethereum very early to play with it without any expectation it will become as wildly valuable as it has. For example, should we all be running a blog where we describe our experiments in cryptocurrency in order to provide some timestamped evidence that it was for personal use? Because a concern to many people would be that, for example, I hold Ethereum and I haven't done anything with it for a year because I was playing around with it. It's gone up a lot. And if there's a transaction on it, there's of course a concern around CGT, and the guidance is less than clear because people don't know what they should be keeping as a record. Your guidance online clearly says you should keep records about it, but when it comes to personal use, the risk of the intention being considered to have changed, I suppose the question in people's minds here I would expect is what should we be doing proactively if in fact that was the intention, to leave a record of it? Literally the only example I can think of is keeping a blog of my experience in crypto, which then is out there to public, and I could point to it and say, there, I've written it once a month about what I'm doing in the space and how it's all for my own learning.
I suppose that's why I went to the first point initially about your purpose can change. So simply because you had a purpose of playing around with it at the beginning doesn't necessarily mean you have that purpose throughout the time of your holding. But if you're holding it, if you're wanting to say, how do I prove that I'm continually just playing around with it, I don't have an intention of holding it as an investment asset, that really depends on what you're doing with it. And so if you're playing around with it to invest in new cryptocurrencies to work out how they might work, then you need to be able to explain the context for that in terms of those transactions. But if they really, in actual fact, when you look at the objective evidence around those transactions point to a different intention, they point to a profit-making intention, then that's something that we'd also have to take into account in looking at the objective purpose of those transactions.
Correct.
Does that help?
Partially, but what would you practically ask someone to give you to show their intentions of purchasing cryptocurrency? Or what would you expect people to keep as a record that might help indicate what their intentions were from a personal use exemption point of view?
So I think one of the things we would want to get a sense of is the nature of the cryptocurrency at the time. So what was going on in the industry in that time in relation to that particular cryptocurrency, that might help in terms of if you're saying it's a it's early on, but I mean, you'd also get that from objective evidence in terms of, you know, publicly available information in relation to that cryptocurrency if it was early on in its life cycle, for instance.
So if I purchase it now, I'm no longer learning, right?
No.
No, because you attended tonight.
It's a question for John Price. John Ireland, Financial Services Partner at Northern Schoolbright. John, interested in the line that was alluded to earlier between definitions for some of these currencies, coins and tokens. ASIC's submission to the Senate's inquiry into digital currencies in 2014 suggested that trading Bitcoin, you're right, not a financial product.
Yep.
The vibe around the information sheets and ICOs seems to suggest actually more about the rights and circumstances of the particular coins or tokens.
Yeah.
I'm interested, is ASIC's thinking sort of evolving over time in relation to these currencies, or are we still alright if we're trading in the main coins?
Yeah, so if you're talking about initial coin offerings, then I think whether or not it's a financial product will very much depend on the rights that attach. If you're talking about a pure digital currency, nothing else attached to it, then our thinking is that is not a financial product. The point is that many digital currencies, or some digital currencies that I've seen, actually do have bits and pieces that are attached to it. So, for example, an escrow facility, various other things, that may take it in to being a financial product. So again, it's going to depend very much on the exact nature of what we're talking about. But if I can use an imprecise legal term, if it's a pure digital currency, no other bells and whistles, then I don't think that's a financial product. By the way, the gentleman who had the question about doing financial service business in Australia, it's ASIC Regulatory Guide 121. It's available on our website.
Hi, it's Francis here. Thank you all for your presentations this evening. They were really interesting. This is again a question for John and ASIC. And you mentioned that your focus is going to be on disclosure and making sure that statements are reading accepted.
Yep.
I'm just wondering, how does that all fit in with the product suitability requirements? Because that's sort of more of an approach where you're preventing people from making bad choices rather than necessarily looking to make good ones.
Yep. So the short answer is we have no product suitability regime at the moment. We have no product intervention power at the moment. These are things that have been proposed. ASIC supports those, but at present we do not have either of those things.
But are you sort of considering them in, or is it just saying that you are going to consider when implementing it?
As far as I know, I haven't even seen final drafting of the bill, so its application to anything is simply a hypothetical from my point of view.
Derek Rainey, First Capital Capital. Knowing that there's a good chance that the occasional ICO might not succeed along the way, just a small chance, then what might also happen is that you'll find that a lot of ICO owners will have zombie coins, coins they can't trade, coins they can't get rid of, coins that might have a last transaction date and that's it. Knowing that you've made an awful lot of money on your other main cryptocurrencies, how can you look towards crystallizing that loss in the ICOs in your capital gains process? Because you're not going to be able to write to the owners of the ICO company and request a letter from their accountant.
Very good question.
Are you talking about as an investor into that ICO?
Correct. So you're an investor, you have capital gains in certain areas, and you've received capital losses in other areas, but you're going to have trouble crystallizing those losses. It's not a normal stock. How does the ATO look towards crystallizing those losses?
So do you mean, so from an investor's point of view, you've actually got some tokens and you just can't trade with anybody, right? This is not something that we've had raised with us before. But it's something that we'll obviously take into account and think about in terms of some of the findings of the.
I think it's really important. I mean, people have
bills to pay and they're not worth anything, or they have $20,000 more stuff in wallet breaks, they can't get it back, and how they prove that it's lost. So there's a lot of stuff happening out there before I mean, that they just lost $5 grand or 100. Oh my God, and that's happening.
Yeah, a couple of things that we're looking at the moment in terms of the next roundabout of advice and guidance are things around lost keys, lost wallets, etc. So they are issues that we're looking to get some guidance out there on. We are obviously also looking at the ICOs and what guidance we can provide both for issuers and investors. That specific issue hasn't been raised yet with us, but now it has. That will fall into the consideration of those issues as well.
Hi, I've got a question for Tony from AUSTRAC. I'm now from the Organised Corporate. So in order to trigger the designated services definition under 50A, so you need to be exchanging a fiat money or digital currency in the course of carrying out a digital currency exchange business or pullback. Yeah, can you provide a little bit of, in terms of AUSTRAC's statutory interpretation as to what they're carrying on a digital currency exchange business extends to, and whether that covers ICOs as well?
That's what you mean.
So as part of an ICO, you are giving the investor is giving Australian dollars or whatever real currency, and they're getting a coin or a token back in return. So is that process considered as carrying on a digital currency exchange business? Yes.
I'm sure I'll try and grab some of the last questions.
Hello, this question is for the ATO. So has the ATO had conversations with current cryptocurrency exchanges, like Australian ones, what kind of functionality that they can add to make it a little bit easier for people to track, especially with regards to token to token? You know, I imagine there's going to be a lot of connections with people who currently they won't have a very easy way to actually track exactly what the tax obligation is.
Yes, we have been engaging with digital exchanges. We've also obviously received a lot of feedback through our consultation as well. There's a number of, the level of information already available seems to vary from quite detailed spreadsheets that can be downloaded with every transaction to feedback we've received from the community about some that have holes in their transactions or what have you. Obviously the new regulations which AUSTRAC are responsible for monitoring compliance with will assist in some respects with that. We are also aware of some products out there that are looking to offer people the ability to track their transactions through them. So I think there are mechanisms out there. It is certainly something that we have been speaking with the digital exchanges about as well. Just trying to, all of us are trying to, I guess, make it as easy as possible for people to comply.
Hi, I have a question of my own, but first I wanted to ask a follow-up with the question with the tokens that become worthless. So if those tokens would be transferred to a burn address, like address 0 in Ethereum, which is essentially like burning them, would that be a realized loss? Would that count?
Burning is something that's just recently come across our table too, so that's another thing that we've got to add to our list to look into.
And the question I have, it's a simple question. I suspect the answer is just yes, but I wanted to find an answer on the ATO website. Do the ATO regulations on wash sales apply to cryptocurrency trades? So wash sale, when you sell an asset before the financial year is about to tick to realize a loss, and then buy it again after the financial year closes.
Just
just trying to understand what your question is. But if the question is if those rules apply just as much to cryptocurrencies, then yes, as an asset, yes.
Last question.
Hi, Arden from UNICEF. I just wanted to ask about donation of cryptocurrencies. So, are they tax deductible to charity? So, donating cryptocurrencies to charity, are they tax deductible?
Sorry, I'm having trouble hearing. Is that about donating cryptocurrency to charities?
Yes. Are they tax deductible? And what is how do you calculate the value of that?
So calculating the value of a tax deduction, I think it was for a charity donation in
fair
crypto.
market value or so.
I think we'd have to take that one on notice, but firstly I would say it would depend on whether the entity is a tax-exempt entity, the charity.
Yes,
so it needs to have that status, of course, just like any other situation. So if you're making a contribution of property to a tax-exempt entity, then you would expect the same rules to apply with cryptocurrency as an asset. But I think that's not something that we've looked at yet. But we would expect the same rules apply.
Right, so we can put it on our website that it is tax deductible.
If you really want to be able to say that, you need to be able to say you've got firstly tax exempt status.
We are tax exempt. I'm from UNICEF.
Oh, sorry, I didn't hear that.
Perhaps one last question I'll allow you, and then we can have some direct discussion with whoever it is again.
This was a question for ASIC around ICOs, which might be security based. There's been some regulation around crowdfunding equity regulation that came out.
Yes.
Is there any consideration to adopting that to ICO space? Because ICOs still allow, access to global risk.
Yeah.
So that's quite a...
So that's a really good question, and it's probably worth bringing up the point that's behind that. So when we've been discussing, or when I've been discussing ICOs, I've been talking about the sort of issuing ICOs directly. That might not be the only way that ASIC regulates ICOs. There might be a collective investment vehicle, a fund, that goes out and invests in various ICOs. And what the investor is actually investing is the fund. Or there might be a company that buys up various ICOs. And what the investor is actually investing in is the company. Or there might be a company that engages in crowdfunding that invests in various ICOs. And again, what you're investing in is the company. So I think the answer to your question is it'll just depend a bit on the circumstances of how you see the investment structure. If you're asking me a question about whether or not a crowdfunding company can directly issue ICOs that are a security, I'm afraid I'm going to have to take that on notice because that is a pretty technical question.
Just for the purpose of closing, we'll take the opportunity to thank the regulators who came for a reminder on. We'll be around for a short while to take some more questions directly. I just want to make special reference to Sharon for making this facility available, and Taro, and a lot of running around. I'd also like to get Adrina and Jason up first from the blockchain group just to say a few words if they still wanted to. Did you? No? Yes? All right. We'll thank them as well for the work in bringing these things together. And a special thing to Kim down the back as well, who also has the fintech side of the event tonight. And lastly, thank you to the regulators for coming today and actually making this happen. Very small invite originally, we built into something quite substantial. For those who want to stay around, there will be some regulators around to ask, if you want to ask us any questions directly. Otherwise, thank you for coming this evening.
What?